Welcome back, everybody, to West Virginia's 7th annual Pagan Day of Prayer, hosted by Rowan Temple of Light and myself, Lady Estelle. Today, we have gathered folks from all different walks of life to pray for peace and unity. We have received more names for our prayer candle. So if you have any prayer requests that you would like to be burned and petitioned later this evening, please send them along. And at 9 o'clock this morning, Our Lady Gwendolyn opened this day of prayer. At 12 p.m., we spoke to Father Thomas, who is working both with the pagan family as well as his Eastern or Catholic family. And with us today, we have another friend. And we are shifting. We've been talking a lot about peace, and now it's time to start talking about unity. We started to define what is praying, how, does one do that, and the power that praying has behind it. And praying is not just a tool for the religious, but it's a tool for anybody. And here to shed some light on that unified vision of magic and the craft and spirituality, etc., is our friend Troll Huldren.
Hello.
Hello. Pronouns they, them. Troll, you have been a practitioner of magic for over 30 years. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Wow. An initiate of the Anderson Faery Tradition, often described as Bardic, Shamanic, Ecstatic, queerly friend. I love that. Queerly American traditional craft.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And you live in North Central West Virginia and a rural queer communal homestead.
I do.
Oh my gosh. That sounds like so much fun. You live there with your apprentice.
Yeah, I do.
And you run a free online traditional witchcraft and folk magic study group as part of your coven. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, we do. Yeah. It's called Hag School, and we meet twice a month online, and we go right now we're going through a book together, and it's about getting tools in the hands of everyone because everyone deserves access to education.
Beautiful. I love that. Absolutely. And your coven is AppleSeed, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Well, welcome very much, Troll. We're very, very glad to have you.
Yeah.
And I understand that you are ready to go.
I'm ready to roll. We're going to start taking a look at the some traditional witchcrafts throughout the world, I guess. But let's begin with a prayer. Since this is about the Pagan Day of Prayer, let's begin by praying together. So I invite everyone to take a breath with me. And we're going to start with a prayer that we begin everything with in the fairy tradition. So I'm going to take a breath. Holy Mother, in whom we live, move, and have our being, from you all things emerge, and unto you all things return. So the title of my presentation is called The Pomegranate's Kiss. It's an introduction to traditional witchcraft, and specifically the vision of traditional witchcraft. And I'm going to ask people, if you're here, to hold your questions to the end. And so let's sort of dive in. When I say witch, when I'm talking about this term, we are talking about a sort of very specific, almost narrowed in idea in the traditional initiatory houses. So I'm going to quote someone who has written a number of books by now. His name is Lee Morgan. He's an author, and he's the magister of the Anderson Coven in Tasmania, in Australia. And so he says, that traditional witchcraft is a form of sorcery only suitable for some people, those we described as marked. Those people have certain forms of perception already in place which can be developed further. It's a life way that involves stepping outside of not just the hedge for flight, but also out of the standard viewpoints of society. It is other. It is foreign to every culture. In some ways, it is monstrous, and from that same place, it derives its grace. He's talking about sort of a spiritual or esoteric or etheric mark that is on the essence of someone that sort of you're born with into society. In a lot of other traditional cultures, those people might be described as other or as being marked for shamanism. I had just watched this really great show that's streaming on Hulu called Battle of the Fates, and it's a survival sort of reality show that has sort of Korean indigenous shamans and fate readers, tarot card readers, people who do birth charts and whatnot, sort of battling each other to sort of deliver the best reading for different clients. And it was really profoundly difficult not to have the empathy and the sort of feeling a real resonance with the stories of a lot of the shamans sort of and what they've gone through, the sort of being born with the spirit sort of having their eye on you. And that's what we're really talking about here as what we mean by when we talk about people who are witches or witched people. We tend to, I'm going to read another quote by Lee that sort of helps us illuminate this. Traditional witchcraft is an art that combines elements of what some call high and low magic, though I dislike those terms, he says, into a fusion where mystical attainment is achieved through sorcerer's means and where sorcery is enabled through mystical realization. The two cannot be divided or considered outside of this relationship. Witchcraft is both a calling to perform an otherworldly duty and a path to mastery. It's the full realization of the all within the self and the self within the all. There's this idea within the initiatory houses that a witch is sort of an otherworldly entity wearing human skin, that we contain components of soul and form that are different from typical human beings. And there's sort of this story that we all sort of at least resonate with sort of psychologically, if not in a more embodied kind of way, that's related to sort of the Watchers legend from the Bible, the story of the Nephilim. That the fallen angels mated with the daughters of man and begat these sort of hybrid entities, and that witches maybe talk about being descended from these entities in some way, that we are expressions of the wild. Robert Cochrane, who is one of the first people to use the term traditional witchcraft back in the 60s, says, a witch is born and not made, or if one is to be made, then tears must be spilt before the moon can be drawn, for the lady chooses whom she wills to be her lover, and those whom she loves the most she rends apart before making them wise. So there's this idea that there's sort of an awakening that we must go through to sort of uncover this otherness that's buried inside of us, and that we're marked from birth. And that's what I mean when I'm talking about witches. And what do I mean when we talk about magic? I think magic is sort of the place where the sacred, where power, the ability to do, is generated from combinations of the forces of creation, often with the cooperation of spirit helpers, discarnate intelligences, and materia magica, who contain, coalesce, and manipulate certain demonic virtues in accordance to working or crafting. Witches often talk about how what we're doing is the nameless art, that Lee Morgan's first book, for instance, is called A Deed Without a Name, that we're up to something that doesn't quite have an ordinary description in ordinary human society. And therefore, we are investing ourselves in the other world, and we come from the other world ultimately, which is our magic. There's this idea that it wells up through us and happens through us as much as it's something that we cause to happen, that we are the place where the otherness and the waking world sort of meet. In the same way that, you can say that, for instance, in indigenous Korean shamanism, the shaman is the bridge between the living and the dead. The witch is very much in the same milieu. Andrew Chumley, who's the former magister of the cult of Sabati, proposed that magic is this sort of mathematical formula where you take belief, will, and desire, and that's where you sort of get magic. But when he says belief, he doesn't mean just sort of an analog of holding on to a set of data. He means that you move in the world in a way that means you mean what you say, that you believe that the spirits are real, and so that you hold your relationship with the spirit world as equally valid and powerful as your relationship with living human beings. That the time you set aside to do your magic and your spirituality is just as important as the time you take to cook yourself a meal and feed nutrition to your body. There's this idea that magic is inherent to the culture of the spirits and the doing being of being a witch, that it is a pressed dimension of the witch self. We work magic in the ways that, anyone else would, whether you're in a ceremonial occult scene, or you're a chaos mage, or you're involved in sort of more tribal looking sorceries. It depends on the witch. There is a diversity of kinds of witches, as we'll get into here in a minute. And that diversity is essential to the coming together, the unity of witching culture. And that countercultural aspect of witchcraft is probably the greatest treasure that traditional witchcraft has to offer the world at this point in time. Witches are often said to be born aware of what we call the fetch, or the dreaming self. And we often experience contact with a familiar spirit even before we know what this being is. And this is part of what makes us a marked entity, a being who has died before we die, because we can leave the perceptual field of our flesh body behind and extend our waking/dreaming awareness as it's sort of merged together into this sort of third way of seeing, and sort of go beyond the flesh, sort of bilocating into other worlds to do what's called the witch's flight, which is some people call it astral traveling, but it also contains a component of being able to affect the waking world in a direct and tangible way through the relevance of miracles. So let's talk about the ways in which traditional witchcraft tends to sort of all these commonalities that are present within lots of different streams, and the way in which we tend to work magic. And it's sort of through this thing we call the triune soul model, or the three worlds model. They're deeply interrelated. There are three souls, we say, that sort of belong to everything. We see the three worlds that play within the three souls. And the words that are sort of a general way to describe them, each tradition of witchcraft will have their own sort of bioregional terminology that is seated within the place in the world in which they're sort of reflecting. But a more general way of talking about these, I like to use the terms fetch, aura, and daemon. The fetch is the dreaming soul. It is said to be seated in the cauldron of the pelvis, and it's the place in us that our power resides. Our auric body is the waking awareness of ourself, and it is breathed in and out of us during our lifetime. And then eventually when we die, we breathe out that waking awareness, that personality, and it sort of depersonalizes and rejoins the wind of the world, usually. And then the demonic self, this is that mysterious, immortal form that we seek to sort of reveal. Most ordinary people will only experience this part of themselves at death, and they'll often experience it as an ancestral form that guides them to the land of the dead. But during our lifetime, witches can sort of merge our awareness from the aura into the fetch, and then there into the demonic awareness, and really experience and bring forth that immortal form, this sort of revelatory mystery of who we really deeply are through all of our lifetimes. The fetch is the part of us that tends to get reborn each lifetime. When we die, it goes into the underworld in the same way that a body is buried or burnt and sent into the earth. The fetch goes into the underworld, into the land of the dead, and that's the part of us that tends to get reincarnated into a new body. The demonic self doesn't move through those cycles. It sort of exists outside of time and space in this perpetual eternity, this infinity. And that's what we sort of seek to tap into, because from that place, all magic can be harnessed. Also of really important mention is the fetch beast. This is a part of us that you'll sometimes hear referred to in different traditions as like the familiar or the second skin. I'll read this little bit that comes from Lee Morgan's book, Standing and Not Falling. Our fetch line or bloodline is usually interpenetrated with the soul force of various animals. These fetch beasts need to be understood as simultaneously an envoy from that animal species that confers upon you certain virtues, but also a mask for ancestrally derived energies. In other words, the bear that lives inside you is your grandpa and was his forefather inside him beforehand. But it's also the spirit of bear, who is also the spirit of the land your ancestors live on. There's sort of this sort of Russian nesting doll phenomena happening in traditional witchcraft. We understand that just like the waking world, the spirit world is a place of hybridity, and where things mix and merge and blend together. And that this fetch beast is a bunch of different things all at once. It's the source of sort of the contagion of the witch self, because it's this blood soul that moves us around in the other world. But it's also it has that quality because it is the part of us that understands the oneness with all flesh, the oneness with everything eventually. It's different to our flesh body, but it contains many former selves, just like the land contains all the bodies of the dead. There's a saying in my tradition, the fairy tradition, that the body of the land and the body of the witch are the same body. And that's a profound mystery that I think that you have to experience it. You can't really explain it away. There's also this idea that to be aware of your fetch is the very same thing as being marked. You're aware of this sort of dreaming self. You know, the part of you that dreams isn't the same self that moves around the waking world. That dreaming self seems to know many things that the waking self knows, maybe everything. But for most of us, the waking self does not know everything the dreaming self does. Most of us in modern day and age have a lot of trouble remembering our dreams because of screens and the pace of life, the way in which our sleep is structured. But the dream world is sort of the first sort of anteroom to the underworld, as we see it in traditional witchcraft, that when we are dreaming, we are entering into the underworld to have a perceptual experience there, and you can move out from your personal underworld into more shared experiences of dream. I want to bring up a really important model that sort of has been developing over the last decade or so within traditional witchcrafts. And I guess maybe we'll start here with the 4 spirit courts. This is an old system of non-hierarchical spirit taxonomy. It's a way of organizing the spirits into sort of groupings. And these 4 colors, you can see them in the Book of Revelations in the Bible. They're the 4 colors of the horses of the apocalypse. You can see them in Shakespeare's play Macbeth, which references an older play from a couple decades earlier called Thomas Middleton's The Witch. And in there are the lines, red spirits and white, black spirits and gray, mingle, 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 you that mingle may. But it's referencing the sort of same really old system of spirit taxonomy, of organizing the spirits into groups based on their virtue, on the quality of essence that they are. And it's not elemental, but it's sort of a little older than that. And they are the black court, the white court, the red court, and the green court, or sometimes we call it the glass court. Glass is a Welsh word that means green or blue, kind of the color of the sea. And these 4 spirit courts, they interact with each other, and nothing is sort of necessarily just one or the other. But what has happened over the last 10 years is Lee Morgan and his coven, the Andorian Coven in Tasmania, has sort of innovated this into an interactive model that I think is really brilliant. And he storied the courts as these 4 serpents or 4 dragons. And that allows us to sort of work with them as animistic forces that can be present in the body, outside of us, sort of every scale of being. There are the 4 serpents of yourself. There are for the 4 serpents of any group that you're a part of. Therefore, the 4 serpents of our culture and the overculture in general. They sort of exist at every scale. And so these are really powerful ways of interacting with the spirit courts and recognizing that everything in the cosmos is generated through unity, through the interaction of spiritual forces, that nothing is pure out there in the real world. And as you can see here, it's pretty straightforward. The black serpent comprises the dead and the underworld, and it's about the binding and the powers of potential and memory, stasis and the primal elements. I think of earth, air, fire, and water as all belonging to the black serpent powers. When the black serpent gets heated up through its interaction with the red serpent, it's said to generate its own fire, the black fire. And it's related to the power to keep silence. The red serpent is that force of contagion and liberation and love. It's the power of desire and the power that embraces other things. It's that libidinal desire that understands the oneness of all flesh, that doesn't divide human beings up into small groups, but we realize that there's only one human race, that we are, as human beings, part of a larger tree of being with everything that bleeds red, and that those forces have interpenetrated the dreaming self of the witch so that we can flower forth those powers and show them and express them within human culture more vibrantly. The white serpent is the power of light and breath and intellect and structured thought. It's related to the seraphic and stellar beings and inspiration and insight. And we often call its fire Awen, or the white fire. And it's related to will, to sort of that penetrating force that drives through things. And then lastly, the green or glass serpent. These are the fairy and plant and sap beings. It is about enchantment and mutability and transformation, spiritual vitality. Our culture in general, we say in traditional witchcraft, has largely left out the green serpent. It's left out the imagination from the everyday life. That traditional witchcraft in a lot of ways is a counterculture that pushes back at the mainstream power story that is about taking the white serpent and overinflating its importance and sort of putting it in charge of everything, and then using the black serpent to enslave the red serpent to work, to create results, to create capital and profit. And so as witches, we push back against that, and we want all the serpents involved in our lives to make us more whole and more healed people. You know, by and large, traditional witchcraft and witches within the communities of traditional witchcraft see the overculture as something that tends to make us pretty ill. It tends to cut us up into little pieces that we compartmentalize ourselves into really small, frail, disintegrated parts. And we want to reintegrate ourselves into wholeness. To achieve mastery means you have to become whole, and that means knowing and recognizing all the parts of yourself. In fact, there's a prayer in my tradition. We call it the flower prayer. And when we do a triple soul alignment, which is an exercise where we use the breath and our attention to align our 3 souls, which we see, as I showed you before, they're located in the pelvis, the rib cage, and the skull. into one sort of perceptual apparatus to sort of engage magic of the world, we say this prayer afterwards, and it goes like this. Who is this flower above me, and what is the work of this God? I would know myself in all my parts. That is about self-gnosis. It's about knowing all these serpents within you. I often think of these serpent powers as the materia, and the souls as like cauldrons or vessels in which these powers are brewed and shared. And, you know, witches tend to be stronger and weaker in the different serpents, and we tend to organize ourselves into the courts based on the serpent power that's mightiest in you. So witches who tend to be red court witches are sort of animal whisperers and people who have an experience of shape-shifting in their dreams and having a really strong connection with a particular animal or fetch shape. They tend to be really human people, really down-to-earth, loving people with a lot of charisma, and life force just sort of sleuths off of them. Everyone wants to be around them because of it. White court witches are typically very rare. They are seraphic entities in human skin, and they have a sort of all-seeing perspective that allows them to sort of understand things from many different ways. Black court witches, that's more sort of the more typical image of the witch, is the proper black court witch, as I've heard Lee refer to it. It's sort of those of us who have a really strong connection to the dead or more underworld entities. And then we have the glass or green court witches. These are the Feyborn, the changeling people. People who have a really strong green thumb and a really deep connection to the land and to otherworldly entities. They may be one or may have a spirit marriage with such a being. But within these courts, we also, let's take a look at these sort of 4 witch gods that are really important to us in the initiatory houses. This is sort of the 4 pillars of our vision of the cosmos is deeply related to these 4 beings. Whereas you often see in Wicca, you see like a witch mother and witch father figure. In traditional witchcraft, there are 4 primary witch gods that sort of stand at the heart of our witchery. We have sort of 2 older and 2 younger beings. We have the Weaver or Old Fate. We have the Master of Magic, the Witch Father. We have the Rose Queen or the Witch Mother. And then we have the Eld King or the Lord of the Underworld, the Lord of the Wild Hunt. And these beings are often referred to by titles because, to quote Orion Foxwood, the witch gods are the gods that made man. If the face of your witch god is a human face, you haven't reached the witch gods yet. These beings are older than humankind. They are the great old ones, the elder gods, and they typically can possess or wear the faces of the gods of human civilizations past, the pagan gods. But they're before that. They're bigger than that. You know, often we see the master or the witch father wearing faces like Pan or Hermes or Apollo. And we see the Eld King wearing faces kind of like the Lord of the Wild Hunt, like Gwyn ap Nudd or Odin. We see the Weaver and Old Fate. We see her wearing faces like Hecate and Hulda. And we see the Rose Queen wearing sort of youthful, sort of fairy queen faces, like Habandia and Perkta and Brigid. And those sort of point to their mysteries. But let's sort of get more into who these beings are. Old Fate, one of her titles is La Grande Belle Dame Sans Merci, the great beautiful lady without mercy. She is the all, the totality, the whole cosmos, created and uncreated, created and unfinished, as we sometimes say. She's the supreme goddess of most initiatory witchcraft houses. She's Grandmother Weaver. She's the star goddess. Fate is understood in traditional witchcraft as the force of everything that has happened in the past as it exerts itself on the present and unfolds into the future. It's very materialist in that way. One of the other ways we talk about her is as the binder, or hard fate. She deals hands we weren't looking for, and she never stops moving, even when we're sleeping. She's always walking, it's said. And so we always have to sort of keep moving, sort of to keep up for her catching up with us. She's the most monstrous mask of God herself. The Rose Queen is a more gentle and more personable aspect and has a different sort of mystery about her. But let's talk about the Master of Magic, who in many ways is her reflection. One of the ways we talk about him in my tradition is the Fairy King, or the Prince of Paradise. He is the Master Turnskin, the sacrificial king who surrendered his true name and has become everything. He has moved through all of the courts and has become everything. You know, sometimes we have this idea that he might be an electron, that he's all light, and he just moves in and out of time to create the material universe. It's a fun story that we like to tell each other. We also talk about him as the chief of all spirits, because he has mastered all magic and he has moved through all the courts to become everything. He is the Lord of hosts to the witches, as it were. We also often talk about him as the witch's devil, which is a term that can freak some people out, but we're definitely not talking about the Christian idea of the devil. And in fact, this word has a lot of interesting colonial imports. You know, depending on where you end up, you see indigenous people having latched onto this word because colonists basically have decried their spirit traditions where they were, and they're like in a process of reclaiming it. And therefore, I think, especially given the fact that the etymological roots of the word devil come from deva, which just means spirit, it's a great word because it contains so much power. And I think that it's something that's useful as a witch. Then let's talk about the Eld King. And this is sort of an older form entity. He often comes as sort of an elderly being, but no less strong and powerful. He's the Lord of the Wild Hunt, the King of the Underworld. Wild places are where you can sort of encounter him. And he often has two very dynamic faces. He's very bright and very dark at the same time, but in a very separated way. Whereas I would say that the Master of Magic takes those two halves and unifies them and blends them together better. He's the guardian of death. He is the guardian of the treasures in the land. You know, one of the ways that Hades was talked about in ancient Greece was as the lord of crops, because the crops grow up out of the land, out of death itself. And we very much understand that mystery in many of the houses of traditional witchcraft. And then finally, the Rose Queen, the Fairy Queen, the secret hidden heart of witchery. Even though a lot of traditional witchery has the Master of Magic, the witch father, the devil figure out front, he shows the way to the Rose Queen, who is hidden at the heart of the labyrinth of the mysteries. She is the daughter self of old fate, and she is the being who wants to liberate us and bring us together. She rides that red serpent. That is her beast. Our flesh bodies are a living memorial to her. They are an expression of her power. We often say that the red serpent is the whole of us, sort of showing forth that great mystery that our physicality is what we actually have to work with in this world. And it is holy, and it is valuable, and it is worthy. And the Rose Queen turns none away. Is something that we say, that she is muse, lover, and hag. She is the giver of henosis, the power of oneness. All acts of love and pleasure are her rituals, and to know the self is an act of love and pleasure. She is the witch mother, and many different traditions will have different names for her. There's this concept you see a lot in witchcraft, that you see the word magistellus. It means little master in Latin. Plural is magistelli. And we kind of see the gods more like families of beings, that in any one location, you're not gonna, when you conjure a spirit or a deity, you're not gonna get that spirit or deity per se. You're gonna get a being that's local, who is in the family of that spirit or deity, who takes on that name and that mantle and mediates the power of that being. It is the logic of divine images, essentially. It's the image of a being who can take on and mediate the power of an even greater or sort of more unified force. So when I am here in outside of Grafton, West Virginia, when I conjure the Witch Father, I'm going to get the local magistellus of the Witch Father, who takes on particular attributes that are related to the bioregion. He's going to reflect the place and the time in which I am. And that's how he's going to sort of come forth, cloaked in that skin, to sort of reveal those mysteries to me. We also have, like I mentioned earlier, those really profound origin stories that are sort of part and parcel of that otherness that we talked about, that witches embody in the initiatory houses. That there's that Nephilim story from Genesis 6:4. It goes, the Nephilim were on earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, the men of renown. It really echoes back into that idea that witches are hybrid entities, that we contain components of soul and form that are a little other than ordinary or typical folks. And because of that, it marks us and allows us to sort of witness and be aware of our dreaming self, and then our immortal form, and we come awakened to that otherness and cross back and forth, sort of bridging the worlds, bridging the relationship between spirits. We are a force of unity and connection in the cosmos. And, to wake that up, you need ordeal, you need trauma. Witches are born through trauma. Cochrane says it in that piece about witches are born. He says, tears must be spilt before the moon can be drawn. He's talking about trauma, about how an experience while living that cracks you open and wakes you up to the other world. And that takes something quite profound. People who have near-death experiences often become psychic after them. That's what we're talking about here. And then there's that really under-discussed piece that I see not really as vibrant in the sort of mainstream discourse around witchcraft, but it's just very, very present within the traditional initiatory houses. That of the fetch mate, or the familiar spirit, or the parhedros, or, pick your term, fairy spouse, spirit spouse, fetch mate, fairy wife, fairy husband. In many of the initiatory traditional houses, it's understood that each witch is linked to a fetch mate. And that term I first heard from Fio Gede Parma, who I believe learned it from Lee, as a sort of gender neutral way, because some of the older terms are like fetch husband or fetch wife. And there's this older lore that sort of says, like, if you're a man, you tend to have a fetch wife. If you're a woman, you tend to have a fetch husband or a fairy husband. And it's sort of sort of heterosexual focused. And those of us in the modern day and age, a lot of us are queer, and my spirit spouse is, identifies as a man. And I don't identify as a man. So this gives us a little more leeway to sort of identify more with the modern language. But what we're getting at is we live in a cosmos that is interdependent and co-reliant. Nothing is accomplished alone. Nobody alive today knows anything without having learned it from people who have lived before. Of course, we make new discoveries, but it's always built on the backs of what's come before. Our whole society is created every day through the work that has been learned through the handicraft and the skilled labor of human beings. And we recreate the world, the human world, every day through that shared labor. Witches know this. I don't necessarily think of traditional witches as a priesthood per se, although sometimes there is a religious aspect to that. I think of us more as like a guild, sort of a hybrid guild, sacred family, where we sort of adopt each other into these little tribes, and then we work together to do magic using our different skill sets and empower each other with the different virtues that we're good at. The idea of the fetchmate is a being that is both a teacher and sort of a mediator to the other side. So in my tradition, we talk about them as like our personal divine twin. They follow you from lifetime to lifetime because you are mated to one another at the fetch, at that dreaming soul, so that when you're reincarnated, that being can follow you into your next reincarnation. Sometimes there are witches who swap places with their fetch mate, where one of the entities lives out a human life, and the other one's the familiar spirit, and then that person dies, and the familiar spirit takes on a flesh body, and the witch who had just passed becomes the familiar spirit, and they swap out who has the body every other lifetime. We often say that it's that friction between the similarities and the differences we have with our fetch mates and other witches that we work closely with that creates the spark of magic, that magical friction. It's also that grist that helps us refine the self toward wholeness. We each hold the keys to each other's mastery because we all have weak places and we all have strong places, weak and strong muscles. In my coven, for instance, I'm a very strong in the black serpent powers. But my fetch mate is very strong in the green and white serpent powers. And my apprentice is a very green and white person, but their spirit spouse is very white and black. And so with each witch, you get a whole retinue of powers because there are the serpents in us that we're strong and weaken. There's the serpents of our primary familiar spirit, our fetch mate. And then there are all the other spirits that are attached to each of you that sort of go out from that. So every witch and every coven of witches is actually a legion of beings. There's that line from the New Testament, the Christian Bible, we are legion. And I think that's very true. You also, because of that, every coven is this beautiful diversity of entities that's unique because you have different combinations of powers. We also have a very strong tie to the dead and a really strong eschatology, a really strong idea of what happens after you die and what the soul goes through as it evolves or transforms through life and death and what that's about. There's this idea of the mighty dead in traditional witchcraft, or the justified dead. These are people who have lived so strongly their passions that their souls become one and they become essentially a god at death. It's the apotheosis or the justification of the witch. It's, in some ways, I talk about it as the personality, the auric body not depersonalizing at death and sort of getting a little stamp from the gods, the witch gods, of approval that sort of fixes it in place, crystallizes it. And sometimes we say that that part of us goes off into nature to suckle at the roots of trees, that part of us goes off to haunt the land, as they say in some other traditions. But one of the big goals of traditional witchcraft practice is to become one of the ascended ancestors and sort of influence the world by fixating your living personality in a way that keeps it doing its job after you pass on and maybe reincarnate in a different way. Let's quickly look at some really notable traditions to give you an idea of who I'm talking about when I'm talking about all these very interesting components. So one of the first traditions to call itself a traditional witchcraft was the Clan of Tubal-Cain, headed by originally Robert Cochrane and then Evan John Jones. And that currently, I believe they're headed by Shawnee Oates and Robin the Dart, although maybe Robin has stepped back a bit. But they're still going strong, and they've been around for decades now. They're a very small coven, but they've inspired many, and always worth checking out their work. I believe Shawnee has written many books. In fact, she's coming out with one called Two Bellows Forge very soon. We also have Cult of Sabati. That is the work that was around a bunch of people in a coven in England. But Andrew Shumley's the big name there, and he wrote a book called, or a grimoire called the Azoisha, which became very popular in the early 2000s. He passed away, and the book is almost impossible to buy because it's thousands of dollars at this point. But he's a big influence. If you can track down any articles written by Andrew Chumley, definitely recommend so. We have Cord Bucca, which is the work of Gemma Gary and folks associated with her in Cornwall. They're sort of a Cornish iteration of traditional witchcraft, and they often refer to the witch's god as Bucca. We have Eforth Wen, which is a tradition I actually studied in. This is here is the late Peter Padden on the left. I studied with him before he passed away. It's a brilliant Welsh-centered traditional witchcraft that derives a lot of stuff from 1734 and sort of Cochrane-inspired craft. We have the Andorian Coven in Tasmania. They are really similar to the fairy tradition, I've found. We're definitely drawing from the same well. I highly recommend Lee Morgan's books, because I feel like he's on the same page as I am as a witch, and I feel like their coven's doing really excellent stuff in the world. 1734, this is Joseph Bearwalker Wilson here on the right. 1734 is often described less as a tradition and more as a method for encountering sort of poetic revelation around the witchcraft mysteries. And they're also sort of interpenetrated with another quasi-tradition called the Toteg tribe, I believe. I could be wrong on my pronunciation of that. But they're really potent and powerful people, and I recommend, if you can find a 1734 group near you, check them out. We also have the fairy tradition, spelled two different ways. This is Victor and Cora Anderson here on the left. They're also both deceased. It's a tradition that ultimately has its roots in a coven in Southern Oregon in the 1930s that got its legs in spiritualism and then sort of developed out of that. Victor found and Cora sort of started teaching people in the San Francisco Bay Area in the 60s and 70s, and the tradition grew out of that. Notable people in the tradition are like Starhawk and Gwydion Penderwen and Ed Fitch, and quite a number of people have been influenced by the Anderson Faery Tradition. A Plant Bran, Ruth Wynne Owens, also influenced 1734 to some degree. It's also a Welsh sort of centered tradition. The name means like the family of Bran. And then lastly, I want to mention what we call the Lonely Road or the White Thread. In traditional witchcraft, you don't have to be in a coven to be recognized as a fully functional, fully practicing traditional witch. The primary initiation is the initiation by the spirits themselves. And covens and traditions of living witches will ruddy or redden that white thread to create the red thread. That's the passage of this power, this white thread through human agency. But ultimately, what you want is that white thread, that midnight lightning to hit you and have a direct experience with your spirits. That is why we emphasize the connection between a witch and their spirit spouse so profoundly, because that is a passage in which power and insight into how to do and perform magic is revealed to us. You'll also see some really important terms. I'm going to speed through this end. We have the compass round, which is kind of like the magic circle in traditional witchcraft, and some people use a magic circle as well as a compass. But the main thing about a compass round is that it is a vehicle for traveling to other worlds, gathering up power from those potentialities. You can think of other worlds as potentials and pulling those potentials back to our waking world to make them blossom and flourish. The compass round is a technology for accessing and mapping and traversing to those other places. It's like kind of like a tesseract or a portal in some ways. We work with something called a stang, which is kind of like a world tree, as well as a shrine to the witch gods, as well as a magic ladder that goes between the worlds, and a device that can help steer our compass between the planes of existence. We use knives as well when we make our compass, or we sometimes work with spirits, or we might be doing certain kinds of magic that require a ritual blade. We definitely use knives, arthames or athames, or witches' knives, depending on what you call it. But primarily, the body of the witch is the most primary tool that we have, because the body of the witch is such a holy vessel. It is a alembic of the spirits of magic. The body of the witch is the body of the land. It is the true grammary that we can read. All of the beings that I have ever been are buried in my fetch, meaning that all my former lifetimes can be unearthed through necromancy, and I can learn from them. I can conjure them up and talk to them as if they're ancestral beings and sort of quiz them and learn things from them. You can do that with sort of any spirit, but witches are gaining ecstatic states, sort of going outside the conditioned boundaries of self, so that we can experience greater and greater perspectives, greater and greater henosis, oneness with reality, with each other. There are these 4 legacies I like to talk about, deeply connected to traditional witchcraft: prophecy, divination, and seership, spirit possession, and hag writing, witch flight, and the eternal Sabbath, and flesh. I call them prophecy, possession, flight, and flesh. And these are the things that traditional witchcraft was sort of put here in the cosmos to do. I often talk about traditional witches as being weeds through the cracks in the sidewalk that is civilization. We are an expression of wild nature busting up through the asphalt of civilization, because civilization encroaches on the wild constantly, but it exists completely and entirely reliant upon the wild, even though we've often forgotten that in our civilization. If we destroy the wild, we destroy our civilization. And witches in some ways are here to sort of push back and protect against that destruction of the wildness, that we mediate wildness, not just wild nature, but the wildness of sexuality, of queerness, the wildness of spirit possession, of showing outside of civilization what it's like, what reinvigorates our soul. It's that glass or green serpent. But because we do all that, we have to have really strong spiritual hygiene. Witches have to take care of ourselves. The body is the alembic of transformation, the temple in which the human and daemon meet, as well as the sacrificial pit and the sacrificial flame. We have to engage in a process of spiritual baths or ritual cleansing regularly, because we have to keep our living apparatus functional. We have to keep them moist with the fat and the vital power, so that when we touch the divine fire, we don't go up in flames and become ruined. The idea is to practice sorcery over a lifetime, and these traditional witch houses, these initiatory houses, are refineries, places where you can learn how to practice witchcraft over a lifetime, develop really refined skills that have been passed down through generations of practitioners, and develop and blossom forth your wholeness. As you're sort of working in synergy with other people, you're making each other stronger and you're healing each other. We often talk of this idea that covens are an oasis from the marketplace world. The marketplace world is another term I learned from Lee Morgan. And it's a place where everything is for sale, trade, or theft. And an oasis of a coven is a place where nothing is for sale, trade, or theft. That our worthiness and our value is beyond sale or trade, and it can't be stolen from us. It's our inherent integrity. It's that last inch of us that can't be given or stolen away. And it's that secret fire inside of each of us that we seek to unite with one another in this counterculture, because we know that it takes many hands to turn the wheel. We cannot do anything alone. And my witchcraft teacher, Gabriel Carrillo, told me that a witchcraft that does not directly challenge the conventions and the mores of the sick culture, it is not a witchcraft. That we have to sort of see the world from a holistic perspective, a perspective that holds so much more as holy and sacred and as belonging, and that we belong to each other. Witchcraft seeks to really understand that we deeply and profoundly belong to each other. We have this little fire in the dark of the cosmos that we call human love, and it doesn't really exist outside of our civilization. And we have to be really careful tending to this fire. Supernovae do not care about our relationships. The universe, I often say, does not care about our relationships. We have to take care of each other as living humans, and we have to take care of our ancestors. Those are the spirits most invested in us as living beings here and now. And with that, I say thank you to everyone. And I'm open for questions.
Wow. Okay, let me see. Firstly, thank you so much. Yeah. I definitely learned a lot. So, a couple things. I liked toward the end, you had said it was very profound about inherently witchcraft being counterculture. And I think that's incredibly important when you start to sort of, especially dig in deep to like almost the biblical definition of witch or pagan compared to the more modern definition of what a witch and a pagan would be, and how the discrepancies are there. I also liked how you talked about spiritual hygiene, because that's something that at least I feel very strongly about. I find learning about these different traditions incredibly fascinating. I know that the fae magic and sorcery and traditional types of witchcraft can open doors to a whole new world. And I will tell you, the first, like, I'm a reformed believer. I like to say, like, I didn't really believe in much of any of it, but I was dabbling a little bit. And then when I first experienced my first, as you were explaining, astral travel, it was the craziest experience of my entire life. I was at a Reiki appointment with an amazing master. She's a psychic and a medium. She knew exactly what she was doing, and I swear to goodness, I had never felt anything like that before in my entire life. It was amazing.
Yeah.
But just like with any craft, protecting ourselves is always non-negotiable, friends.
Amen. Yeah.
Especially if we're working with spirits, because Troll, I don't know about you, and I don't work with many consistent spirits whatsoever, but when I would, or when I do, I treat them and I speak to them like with the same respect as I would any other person.
Absolutely.
So make sure that you mind your manners, folks.
Yeah. Especially, I find that a lot of spirits are from a different time. I think especially like the fairy entities are ancient beings. And so they're used to a level of manners that come from our ancestors even. And so you have to be really careful with them as you sort of tread lightly, as it were.
Well, and because your ancestors, right, it's very human-centered.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And it's like, you have to tread lightly because they were humans too. And that still might be the energy they're tagging along. They're chugging along, you know what I mean? So you have to be humble. You have to know, humility is the word I'm looking for.
Yes. Yes. Wear that cloak of humility.
Right. Right. So I also liked where you had talked about different crafts from around the world. That was cool. And the incredibly diverse ways that humans have tapped into their more personal and cultural powers around the world, that power, that magic, that prayer, whatever it may be. And you had said, you were talking about how spirits like to conform to their bioregion. And it's almost like that, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. When I've conjured, for instance, the witch mother, for instance, she came in a very particular way when I lived on the West Coast, and she had a very particular sort of appearance, or at least attributes that she would often come with her. And I'm very sighted, so I see physically like things. And when I moved to Ohio after being initiated, I moved to Ohio and lived there for some years. And when I would conjure her, she came in a very different way, and she had a slightly different name that was just skewed a little. It was sort of emphasizing a slightly different set of attributes over others. I think the gods really are like big beings that are families of entities, or I often think, what is a human? If I am everyone that I've ever lived as, well, then I have all these dead people sort of as a multitude of voices that can speak through me as a witch. The gods might be something like that, a multitude of entities that speak together through one unity, as it were.
I always like to ask those what if questions. What if we're living in a Greek tragedy, and a millennia from now, people are going to be reading the story of Apollo, right, as in Revelations,
Yeah.
I very much like asking those what if questions, because a lot of times, there really isn't a lot of times a right answer. It's just you figuring out how it fits into your perception of the universe and of the world.
Yeah. We all have to come to truth in our own way. We all have to make the journey in our own footsteps.
And practice that spiritual hygiene.
Yes. Wash your hands.
Wash your hands. Practice the real hygiene too while you're at it.
Right.
My goodness. I am more interested in hearing more about the Nephilim at a different time.
Yeah.
But I would love to hear more about that, especially as it compares to some of the cultural texts that we have. Also, speaking of cultural texts, tell me, friend, how many Terry Pratchett books have you read?
Oh, quite a few. Quite a few, yeah.
I knew it.
Yeah.
I was, when you said the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, I said, friend.
Yeah. I love Lords and Ladies. Lords and Ladies is my favorite.
I'm reading it now.
Yeah.
Listen, no, you don't understand. I have to show you this because it's I literally wrote a Lords and Ladies quote in my book. Do you want to hear what it says?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't go paddling with the occult. Once you start paddling with the occult, you start believing in spirits. And when you start believing in spirits, you start believing in gods. And then you're in trouble. Nanny Og says, but all them things exist. Granny Weatherwax says, that's no call to go around believing in them. It only encourages them.
Yep. Exactly.
That's honestly how, just me personally, how I view polytheism compared to like a monotheism. And I know we're not necessarily, I like how at the beginning you had made this distinction between like spiritualism and magic, because not all magic is connected to your spiritualism or your religion. And that's fantastic. For someone like me, I connect mine a little bit more because where I draw my power from is actually what I was thinking is that aura that you were talking about, right? In the middle of my body here. Yeah. But that was Lords and Ladies, but in Witches Abroad, right? She was like, believing in gods or like believing in the postman. I don't have to go around believing in the postman to know that he exists. So like, I know all of these things exist, but I'm just going to stick to believing in this thing or not believing in this thing because...
Yeah, you only got so much time and energy anyway.
So much time, energy.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's less about like believing in a particular god and do I have a relationship with that being? Like, I don't have a relationship with every human. I don't need a relationship with every human, but I can certainly believe that your mom exists.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's in that same vein. Like, I don't need to be connected to every spirit or god. I work with the ones that sort of that are in my corner, as it were. Just like, my friends. We tend to, at least in my tradition, really think of our spiritual courts as our allies, like our friends, our family. Like we're deeply enmeshed with them.
Absolutely. And I think that's actually important for our friends at home to remember, is that when you set off to form a relationship or to work with a spirit guide or in whatever form that spirit guide may be, it's incredibly important that that relationship be individualized to you. And it's incredibly important for that relationship to positively develop before you go off doing anything else willy-nilly.
Exactly. You got to trust each other as beings, And one thing I may not have mentioned, I think this is really important, is like one thing that we often talk about with like our fetch mates in traditional witchcraft is that being is not just teaching me. Like I have taught my fetch mate magic that he didn't know. So, it's mutual. We're very mutual with our spirits. We don't set them above ourselves. We're not trying to belittle ourselves. We are just as holy as they are.
Oh, and I'm really starting to see, especially you were talking about the different quartz or the different serpents. I'm starting to see how magic is sort of divided into that, because you have, well, I have ADHD and now I've forgotten what I was saying.
No worries.
But anyway, it makes sense. I like how it goes with the theme. Oh my goodness gracious. Let me see if there are any additional questions. And while I do that, Troll, do you have any thoughts?
I'm just really thrilled to be here. I'm excited that this is happening, and it's really good to see people stepping up and doing the important work of showing up for community.
I just remembered what I was going to say now.
Yeah.
When you mix, say, magic with like the spiritualism, it almost is like that white court. When you mix magic with practicalism, it almost is like that green court.
Mm-hmm.
And then you mix magic with power. What do you think with the black court? I'm not sure.
I would say that, like, definitely related to power, because I think, the ancestral forces, I think that's where most of our power comes from,
And it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah. I mean, just if you just think about the material aspect of like a lived life, like our reputations as human beings are built on what people say about our relatives and what people knew about our relatives. And, that sort of sets us up for a life. We stand on the shoulders of the dead and in profound ways, I think.
What would you say to a person who either doesn't have a good relationship with their ancestors or does not know their ancestors?
I think that there's the ancestors of the blood, and I am also not really close with some of my more recent ancestors. I have to go back several generations to even start getting people I'm compatible with. So that's possible. A lot of the witches I know go back so far that we're talking like Neanderthal ancestors, like early Ice Age folks, before they're really getting compatibility. And if you don't know your ancestors, you can always just put out a call and be like, come to me, spirits who are of the things I'm into. The ancestors of the craft, as we say, the mighty dead, aren't blood ancestors. They're the ancestors of magic. So you can call out to the deceased sorcerers and have them come teach you magic and make a family of spirits that way.
And in the presentation, you had mentioned, which again is another sort of Pratchett had come to mind, which I love because a lot of my craft is actually sort of a little bit Pratchettian, but that's not the point. The point is, the witch is the land. The land is in the witch's body. Yeah. And in Pratchett's universe, we see that with the witch from the chalk. Nobody thought the chalk would produce any good witch, and I won't give any spoilers, but it does.
Yeah.
And this young lady comes along and proves everyone wrong, that the chalk can in fact make a good witch, because the land is in her bones. But the land isn't just dirt or clay or whatever, chalk. It's the people that have lived on that land and have made that land what it is. And I feel very strongly about Appalachia in that way. We are older than the rings of Saturn here.
Yeah.
Older than the rings of Saturn. Some silly person on the internet had said, oh, well, I don't know why they call it the mountain state. It's nothing but hills. Friend, erosion.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of it?
These are some
older than the rings
hills.
of Saturn.
Yeah. Yeah. And this, right here in West Virginia, we used to be merged with Ireland and Wales and Scotland. Like, yes. We were all one place at one point.
Mm-hmm. They are not very far away from our very doorsteps, friends.
That's right.
Absolutely. Well, Troll, thank you so much for being here with us today. The conversation has been great. The presentation was fantastic. I learned a lot, and I'm so grateful that you were here with us.
Yeah, thank you. Have a blessed day, everyone.
You as well. Thank you. See you, everybody, at 6 p.m., where we will have Dottie, the president of the Mid-Ohio Valley Pagan Pride. So join us at 6 p.m. tonight for that excellent and exciting conversation. See y'all later.